Hello everyone. Sorry we've not done a video for a while. I've been in Croatia, but we want to start afresh really with a call with Kate. And Kate, this is about your friend Danny.
Yes.
And we
Yeah.
just wanted to have a. I don't even know how to open this conversation up. But I'll be honest with you. But you sent us a message, and Danny's no longer with us.
No, correct. He passed away 3 months ago on Wednesday.
Okay. Just jog my memory as well, just to give other people context. How come he contacted us? How did we end up here?
You were the charity we chose for people to donate to at his funeral. And Danny passed away as a result of mental health struggles, I guess, that he had had for the last 10 years. And as a result of his mental health struggles, he chose to drink, and would drink to quite an extent, completely on his own, completely in silence, wouldn't tell anybody until kind of a few days into that episode, as we would call them.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'd be able to catch it early and it would last a few days. Sometimes it would last weeks. And this time round, he didn't make it through.
Wow. Because did you say as well that he also was a mental health worker, or he was quite aware of mental health?
No, he
No,
was
he
very
wasn't
mental
a
health aware, I
worker.
think, from what I picked up, which was just
Yeah, he was very aware. He had a therapist. He was very aware of what he was going through and did a lot of reading, and he, wanted to at some point in his life potentially become a therapist himself.
Wow.
wow.
I think, and something we can, I guess, talk about, I think what Danny really struggled with was the label of being an alcoholic and not quite understanding where he sat within the spectrum of it, and not really wanting to admit or surrender to the illness, I guess, that he had. And as a result, didn't quite put in enough of the work that really he needed to do to get him through this. Like whether that was, I think he didn't feel like he belonged with AA, but didn't know where else to place himself, and really needed consistent, seeing a therapist once a week or once every 2 weeks was just not enough.
Did he have breaks from drinking?
Yeah, he went a year being sober at one point. He wouldn't drink in between, so it was purely a
mechanism. It was an escape. It was an escape. It wasn't alcoholism. Really, or that we would understand alcoholism to be, with kind of, drinks hidden away, or
exactly.
not being able to operate throughout the day without having a drink.
Yeah. I think that was a big part of it for him, that you say you've got problems with drink and people just assume they need to hide their booze from you when you come over, or they shouldn't invite you out anymore. And that wasn't the case. Like, we'd go for dinner and he would want me to have a glass of wine. I could have, I would stay with him and I'd have bottles of wine and he wouldn't touch it. It wasn't about that. It was about purely escaping the deep anxiety and depression he would fall into. And he chose alcohol as a release. Some people choose other things.
Yeah.
And of course, that takes a toll. But I guess the sadness that felt afterwards, and why I contacted you, was, there were 500 people at his funeral, and so many close friends, close dear friends of his that are great people, didn't know the struggles. And so many people I spoke to, I mean, we've been best friends for like 22 years. I was really close to him, so I was lucky enough to be one of the people that he confided in. And even I don't think that I knew the depth of everything.
I was going to say, did he confide in you, or did you kind of trip over it?
No, he confided in me, first of all, 10 years ago. He called me to say that he thought he was having a bit of a breakdown, and it kind of went on from there. But I just thought there were so many people there that wanted to help and said, if only I'd known. And I think that was the sadness for me, that, and I know it's a really private issue, and it's a very deep, difficult conversation to have, and I understand that, but being more honest and people talking more about their struggles and being kind of more truthful, I guess. You know, if Danny could see the amount of people who would have helped or tried or supported, it was just deeply sad.
I mean, it's really half sad and half infuriating, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just was there a trigger for him, his kind of mental health situation to begin with? I mean, was there like a job loss or a relationship breakdown or anything like that actually kind of originally triggered it, or not really, that you can put your finger on?
He was in a toxic relationship at the time. Hi,
Okay.
Andy.
Hi, Andy.
Hey guys.
All right. Yeah.
He was in a toxic relationship at the time, and I think things came up from maybe kind of younger childhood, which had worked through. But then I think it got to a point where anything, I guess, could have been a bit of a trigger.
Okay.
You couldn't necessarily put your finger, you know, sometimes it had been a relationship, sometimes it had been, you know, any sort of issue that might come in. So I couldn't put my finger on it. But
so was he what we call, like with me, I'm what they call, I'm borderline personality disorder, but technically I'm high functioning borderline personality disorder. I'm also a high functioning depressive. So with me and that's something I struggled with until MANUP. Sometimes I do. Steve's one of the people I think knew from quite early on, is I would never ever admit that I was depressed to anybody on the planet, because I don't want to be seen as that bloke who's crying in bed for 24 hours or whatever. Because actually when I was in my darkest moments, and thankfully I'm past most of that now, when I was depressed, I was the best salesman in the call centre. I was the best at this. I was racing motorbikes. I was really good at that. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I could use that to switch off. And is that the same as Daniel, where maybe he could hide under that high functioning bracket?
Yeah, and Andy would probably be better to talk about that as well. But yeah, Danny, I mean, I think Danny hid from all of us what was really going on inside his head, very much so. And I think that was one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to talk in some way about him, because if you looked at Danny from the outside, he was a very good looking guy, you know, would have been seemingly successful, fashionable, cool, like loads of friends, like traveled, you know, had a great 20s. You wouldn't necessarily think that there was anything under the surface.
Yeah, very often the case.
And it like scared me that if this can happen to somebody who seemingly has so much around them, really loving family, lots of friends, you know, lots going on, then how difficult must it be for people who maybe aren't that lucky?
Yeah.
And that can still happen to someone.
I don't think it matters to them. I don't think it matters to them. I mean, I suppose we expect everybody with mental issues to look like a tramp because they're incapable of looking after themselves, or, you know, being healthy, or dressing nicely, or having a shower, or, you know, all these kind of, you know, things that we think. And honestly, I mean, the truth couldn't be further from the truth. You know, and these people have ways of hiding this stuff and hiding their feelings and just outwardly, you know, and which is what MANUP's all about. You know, it's, you know, don't hide all of this stuff, talk about it, you know. But you're saying that, you know, he was talking about it, but
only to a very small group of people, I think, probably. And that's why Andy's on the call as well. Like, I think probably the two of us were the only two that he kind of opened up to such an extent that we understood. Would you say, Andy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think he did. You know, we were very similar in lots of different ways. Hence why we were so close. And we knew each other for a long time. And I think he probably saw in me my deterioration, if you like, and my kind of coping mechanisms, and maybe thought, and I think in some way kind of that was a bit of a comfort to him, you know, that there was someone else, and we would, you know, as a result, kind of talk about things quite closely. I mean, when I ended up using alcohol, you know, as a massive kind of crutch, really, and an escape from my feelings. And although, you know, the consequences for me with that were pretty dire quite quickly. And I think Danny probably did this, you know, we did the same in a way. It's just, I suppose with Danny, he was kind of able to cover that up a little bit more. He you know, his behavior wasn't, you know, bad when he drank, certainly to, you know, for a long time. And I think, you know, as a result, it kind of, that probably, it never felt like he thought he was that bad, because I was worse, almost.
It's that social media comparison kind of thing, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
If you get stuck in comparing yourself to other people.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game. 100%.
It is, yeah,
it really is. And I think, you know, we would, a lot of the time, you know, we would kind of make light of stuff. You know, we'd kind of, probably before maybe I and then Danny had fully admitted how much we did struggle, you know, we'd kind of joke about things and use a lot of humor around it. And I don't think either of us, probably because, you know, from my own experience with my mental health struggles or challenges, you know, if you find someone that you feel comfortable with and you're doing things that you enjoy doing, and for me that involves, you know, a lot of drinking and a lot of going out, I don't want to talk about how bad I feel normally. You know what I mean? Like, this is my escape. I don't want to talk about things now. And you know, so we would communicate, and we would talk about things when we saw each other, you know, probably on a hangover, or we'd go into, you know, extreme behaviors, which would be, you know, now we're going to get really fit, or now we're going to focus on work, or now we're going to earn money, or, you know, all escape, you know, not necessarily negative things, but, you know, using them to kind of escape the feelings, I suppose, or escape the.
And how long would those kind of periods last?
Were
they kind of a flash in the pan, or were they kind of a couple of months and you got quite serious about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Danny, you know, I mean, like, Kate will know probably a little bit more than me with regards to when Danny was a little bit younger, but I don't think, I think he was very sensitive, you know, and I think that, you know, I very much relate to that. And I think people that often end up with struggling with anxiety and depression and things like that are often very sensitive people, you know, picking up on lots of different things all the time. How are other people viewing us? You know, very worried about being liked. And although I think Danny had, you know, obviously grew up with that and had that stuff going on, I think he had enough positive things in his life to allow him to probably just have kind of like normal levels of probably, you know, going up and down, as it were, and not really like having, you know, Kate again will probably know, like when he was young, I don't think he had long periods of struggling, you know, with probably what you would class as depression or anxiety. That would probably be more normal levels. And he had, as I say, you know, he was successful with the work that he did. He was you know, he was clever at school. He did, you know, went off to university, you know, had, you know, good relationships, and was working and was doing well. I think, you know, like we touched upon earlier, when it moved on towards kind of maybe social media comparison, you know, how am I doing compared to my peers? You know, he's very much, you know, he's a very proud man. You know, wanted to be successful, certainly wanted to be seen as being successful. You know, and obviously, you know, like we said, when you, which he was, you know, right, but when you start comparing yourself and mixing in circles, you know, it's a never-ending game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's when more the struggles started to come in, when he, you know, because he moved away from the work he was doing, because he was earning money in a different way, which meant that he had less structure. He wasn't sort of dealing with people as much. He wouldn't see people as much. You know, and obviously social media gives you the impression that you're quite connected to people, but often you feel more isolated, you know. I only need to go on Instagram for 10 minutes to feel like a piece of shit, you know what I mean? But fortunately, it's like enough awareness to kind of know what's going on. You know, and I'm not saying that Danny didn't have the awareness with that, but it's very addictive, you know. And if you're spending lots of time on your own, that's the way that you feel connected to people. And I think, although, like Kate said, he you know, would stay in touch with very close friends and family, particularly, he wouldn't necessarily kind of see people outside of those circles as much. And I would say that was when the kind of deterioration of longer periods of probably
isolation.
Isolation,
or just being on his own.
I think a bit of both, and being on his own work-wise every day. I think that takes its toll. And you know, one thing that we talked a lot about was, you know, finding a purpose, because I think that gives you, like Andy was saying, kind of structure as well. And it would have maybe stuck because he drank at home on his own. So when you are just your own boss and you don't then have an office to go into or anybody,
do what you like when you like,
you can exactly, and it enabled him. And then I think as we get older in general, the big circle of friends starts to wean off. And you know, especially in Danny's situation, which, you know, I can relate to as well, single, a lot of his friends, pretty much all of them married or with somebody and with children. And then you all of a sudden have gone from being incredibly popular and social to not really having that same network, although everybody would have been there. It's just kind of changing the mindset and realizing you've got to put yourself
day to day gets in the way. You know, if you're juggling a job and a home and kids and a wife or spouse, let's say, sorry, you know, it's very different to being a single guy.
Totally. And you know, it's being proactive and putting yourself, I guess, in their life and reaching out in a way that maybe, like you say, you know, they're going to forget to do because they're juggling so many different things. And I think that isolation, you know, certainly played a part in his anxiety. And you know, if not that anybody could have done anything different, it's, you know, that's on Danny, but just as a, I guess, takeout from it all, it just felt so desperately sad afterwards for us to sit there and see all these people at a funeral that loved him. And for a conversation I'd had with him not that long ago where he's saying, you know, I don't really have that many friends anymore. And you think, oh, couldn't be further from the truth. But I think it's reaching out and having those conversations because they're needed.
It goes to that thing. There's another charity we're helping them with a few bits and bobs about speaking and relating to men. And I was like, they were like, why do you think the stigma is that bad with men and mental health? I was like, there is a stigma. Let's not piss about. There is a stigma, but I think, I don't know how long you follow. I've had one-on-one conversations, group videos in the hundreds now. So I'd like to say, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I'd like to say, I think I've got some sort of voice with that now. I've had these conversations in the hundreds now. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but the one thing what I'm seeing more and more and more, and I'm changing my own mindset. Maybe it's in our DNA. Maybe it's in the stigma is in men's DNA. Because actually,
I think men, as the only girl on the call, I think men and women speak differently to each other. Like when I sit with my girlfriends, we look at each other, we sit around and we are really involved, and that is the way that we meet up. But I think for guys, like you meet and maybe you're watching a football match, or it's the things that you do are very different to just the way that we, you know, I speak with my girlfriends. It's a really nurturing conversation, and it feels a much easier space to talk about feelings. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why, I mean, Danny and I were very close naturally, but as a girl, it felt easier for him to talk to me than going to another guy who,
because your reaction to him would be completely different to Andy's reaction, purely based on gender, and purely because you're wired up in a different way, and it is really odd. If you ever read a book called I can never remember which way round it is, but men are from Mars, women are from Venus or something, and it just displays this whole, the way that women interact with people, a group, male or female, and the same for males, how they interact with girlfriends and you know, their mates, and they're poles apart. They're just poles apart.
I think it's definitely, totally, I mean, totally agree with that. It's evolving for men to talk to men more so. And I think, you know, when I got sober, you know, and entered into recovery, you know, I started to develop a language for it, but it was still, you know, even I think because it was very, well, in the end, very easy for me to talk to other people in recovery and people in that setting, because you're kind of all in that.
You're all in the same boat.
Yeah,
you're in shit creek without a paddle, aren't you? And
exactly.
and some, you know, who's got the paddle? Somebody's got to find a paddle somewhere, and we can get moving.
Exactly. And you know, you would kind of have this goal. You know, everybody's got this sole sort of focus, if you like, and then you develop the language. And I was always able to, you know, kind of communicate with men in that environment really easily, actually. You know, after a short while. And I think because, you know, that our friendship group was, and I think that what I see with a lot of men is, because sensitivity, insecurity is something that you just, I'm not saying this is the case now with children, but I certainly when I was growing up, you know, it wasn't something that was ever really given any space. So you just don't develop that side of you, you know, you repress that. And, you know, my experience of being insecure or feeling anxious is I'm kind of on the attack, or the, you know, I'm very defensive and I'm on the attack straight away. So our friendship group was based around a lot of taking the piss out of each other.
Yep.
You know, classic kind of male banter, hate that word, but you know, that kind of language, you know, and Danny and I would probably be the worst for it, to be fair. So I think even when, you know, he, you know, obviously knew that I was in recovery and had kind of had my own challenges, even when we were talking about things, there was, you know, because we'd come through a lot of that, it was very, I felt it was hard. It was harder for us to connect in that way. I would show a lot of vulnerability because my experience is, you know, the more comfortable I become with myself, the more comfortable I am with being vulnerable in front of other people and talking about my emotions or expressing my emotions. And I would do that with Danny, but I still felt and I would give him space to talk to me about his, you know, situation. And although he would talk to me a little bit, I always felt like it was kind of like, yeah, I'm totally fucked, but I'm all right. You know what I mean? It's that classic, you know, as a man, it's like, I'm totally fucked, but I don't need any help. I'll sort this out myself, you know, kind of thing. And
well, it's a typical man thing, isn't
it? Really? Exactly. And I think,
you know, that men don't ask for help, you know.
that's the thing, you know. I think, like, going back to kind of, is it in our DNA, and that I think it is, you know. And I would say I know people. Is it the same in Danny's case? Maybe to a certain extent, where pride will kill people.
Yeah, pride comes before a fall, they say, don't they?
Exactly, because I don't want to ask for help, and even if I do ask for help, I don't really want to tell you the whole truth.
Yeah.
It's like people that
so the precious little I think I can get away with, just for you to get the idea.
Totally, you know, and I can relate to that from my own experience, you know. And it's been a very gradual and slow journey to really now being able to say, you know, this is me, and this is I struggle with my mental health. Of course I fucking do. Do you know what I mean? In the world that we live in, it's totally normal. You know, fortunately, I have spaces where I can express that side. You know, and I've got relationships with people where I can talk about that, and I don't need to be ashamed. But I can still have that sense of, you know, like you say, 5-10 minutes on Instagram, or chatting to my friends who have been successful, you know, in inverted commas, with regards to financial success or material success, and think, actually, I'm a fucking piece of shit. What's the point? Let's just knock this in the head. You know, and that can come on very quickly, you know. And if someone hasn't got the awareness of what that is, and hasn't got any space to talk about it, over time you end up in a pressure cooker situation where you're gonna need some relief, you know. And whether that's drugs, alcohol, prescription drugs, you know, whatever it is, fast cars, extreme behaviors, you know.
Well, I think that's something we actively promote. And I remember someone got really upset because I've said, I use it, Steve said this so many times, so I apologize, but it's just, we actively promote nip it in the bud early, which is why, actually, funny enough, as a charity, as a men's mental health charity, we very rarely talk about suicide. So we just feel when people talk about men and mental health, it's suicide. And on the other hand, it's feelings, get in touch with your feminine side. Do you know what? If that works for you, then fair enough, that works for you. I never ever talk about feelings. It's just not my term. It's not my terminology. I think where I'm going with this one is, I think it's like what you said, and I'll use my example. So especially in a straight relationship, is the minute a bloke starts acting weird, acting a bit of a dickhead, whatever terminology, the woman will always know something's wrong. And the minute he starts saying he's leave me alone, or just shut, or even worse, just shutting down, she will then start doubting herself. And what do women do? They speak to their friends. Is it me or is it him? Something's going on. Or even worse, they speak to their mum. And if they speak to their mum, but if they speak to their mum, your relationship might as well is gone. So I
told you he was an arsehole.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And then you get a relationship problem. So we're just like, well, if you deal with it so early, of like, this is doing my head in, this client hasn't paid, or me and Faye, for example, who's my spouse, I'm quite happy to say, do you know what, you're doing my head in. I'm going camping for a couple of days. And we're totally fine with that. Even with her, she's like, do you know what, you're doing my head in because of your business or the charity. I'm sick of you talking about MANUP. I'm going to Ireland with my girlfriends for a couple of days. And
yeah, it's having that communication, isn't it?
Exactly that. Rather than let all of those little things build up and up and up and up. And then your brain just farts so much where you just like, you don't actually know how you got into this mess. Kate, I feel like you're going to say something.
No, I think she's having a cough.
Oh, right. Sorry.
I think she muted herself because she was coughing.
Yeah, I do agree with what you're saying and nipping in bud early. I think it's just depending on how you, I guess, I'm just trying to think of how Danny would have done that. And I think what's been really interesting in speaking to people who have, say, had alcohol, not even just issues, but decided recently to give up alcohol because it wasn't serving them, and how much easier it's been for them to have that conversation, like, because it was just their choice, because it was, you know, I was speaking to a friend at the wake afterwards, and he was like, I have been teetotal for a year now. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, you know, because he'd be the person who'd go out on a Friday and come back on a Monday. And he was like, this isn't good for me. But just that felt like such an easier conversation for him to have, and for him to just go ahead and do it. than alcohol being related to something that's going on mentally for you, and then that being such a harder conversation to have, to just nip in the bud, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
Say, I'm just, I'm giving up alcohol because I'm so fed up of the hangovers or being wasted all the time or whatever.
But isn't that's two sides of the same coin? I mean, mentally, you've got two people there. One is using their mental ability to say, I've had enough of this, pack and knock it on the head. On the other side of the coin, you've got somebody whose mentality is running them, really, and saying, drink and get absolutely wasted. And you'll find some sort of solace in that. Do you see what I mean? It just shows you how powerful the mind is.
Oh yeah.
In deciding which route you take.
Well, this is something that Andy and I have spoken about at length and stuff, and the difficulty. Danny being sober would choose to pick up the bottle rather than call one of us, and I think that's the one thing that still plays, so heavily and always will do. And we've had 10 years of this, of why, come on, why? And that's why, I guess, one of the reasons for going on here and wanting to kind of speak out is, there will be an end at some point. We always knew, I guess, I've grieved Danny for years, knowing something bad would happen one day if he didn't get that consistent help. And it was still a shock when it happened, but we kind of in the back of our heads, whereas for some people it was a total shock. They had no idea he was dealing with anything. But it's just, I guess, like that speaking out, that talking about, a lot of people thought he had problems with alcohol, but not linking that to having any sort of mental health issue, not seeing it, just being like, oh, he just, he couldn't really drink.
Yeah, just a lightweight.
And that's why. And there's such different, vast conversations.
Yeah.
So I think though, just before we do draw to a close, I don't know how to end this really, because I don't want to say what could be changed, because it didn't. If I'll be honest with you, we're here. We are where we are. But if I don't know. What's the outcome you want from this video? Because obviously it's going to go onto our social media and all this kind of stuff. What's the outcome you? I'll tell you what, Kate, you answer it first, and then you answer it. But what's the outcome you want from this video?
I just don't want to see this happen to anybody else. Which that's the sad thing. It probably will, and people thinking that they are invincible, and that's what Danny felt. That he could handle this on his own, that he didn't need to, whether it's, do AA or, have that kind of consistent help. Because this is a disease. If you had a broken leg, you'd see a doctor, you'd see a physio, you'd see various different people. People would understand it. You would do everything in your power to get that broken leg better. And I don't think Danny wanted to surrender to this. So, and he needed to, because wasn't invincible. And especially when you are putting drink and drugs, he wasn't putting drugs, but if that's somebody's crutch, doing that to your body's not going to tolerate it forevermore. Even if you think that you can't. Danny didn't take his own life. It was an accident from drinking too much for a very long period of time and his body giving up on him. And I don't think he ever thought that would be the case. So I think, if anybody out there can resonate in any way, please put that help in, speak to more people, because so many more people out there will be going through stuff that maybe you're not realizing because you're not talking, and that, seek the help, because there shouldn't be shame around this anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And Andy, called you Adam there. Andy, what's your same question really? It's just what's the outcome you personally want from this video?
Yeah, I mean, I think when Kate mentioned this, I think, it's about obviously what's happened to Danny has happened, but wanting to sort of do, have something positive to come from that. And reiterating really what kind of Kate has said is that, and I guess it goes for so many things in life. It's like it can happen to you. You know what I mean? Like and also to take your mental health as seriously as you would take your physical health. Because, again, it can in the end lead to dire consequences. Try and find that person that you feel able to communicate with. It's not all, I know because we always sort of talk about, talk to somebody, but I've heard it said by other people kind of in this field, around kind of ideally we need to try and create more spaces for people to talk, because it's very hard, isn't it, as we've just been speaking about, to ask for help. So trying to, it's great that you guys are here, but trying to, for people to find that space that they can open up to, look at mental health charities, or whether it's addiction or anything like that, look at the support that there is for that. Because you can go from being, a supremely fit, physical, healthy man, with everything at your feet, and deteriorate in a matter of years, to the point where, your body can't cope with, how you're trying to deal with your mental health, and it's I suppose, take it seriously and try and find the help that you can. And it doesn't mean your life's over. I suppose that's the other thing. My experience has been that just because you admit that you suffer from anxiety, or you suffer from depression, or you're OCD, or an alcoholic, or whatever it is, it doesn't mean your life's over.
It's understanding how to manage it.
Exactly.
Isn't it, Freddie?
Well, yeah, it's again, so we actively promote it. It's just we can either decide to we can either decide to live with whatever problem, and dare I say, I don't want to. We one of our ambassadors is a retired alcoholic, as we like to say. But he's accepted that he'll always be an alcoholic, but he's now living with it. He's not suffering; he's living with it. Exactly, right. With me with the high function BPD and the depression, I have to learn to live with it. There's somebody who's in hospital very close to me at the moment. I have to say to that person, I'm like, actually, do you know what? Going forwards, you might have anxiety, you might have bits of depression, but you can learn to use that as a superpower.
Totally.
No, I do think with each and every one of us have got that capability of learning that, but we need to be willing to listen to learn as well. But on the other hand, again, before we draw to close, I think on the other hand, when people do reach out and speak to their friends or whatever else, I just plead with the people who are listening, don't turn into a doctor. And I've noticed that with men, when we talk about mental health, it's like, okay, let's just sit down, let's just get in touch with our whatever side and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, sometimes it's like, Andy, what the fuck's wrong with you, mate? Obviously, I'd never say that to Kate. It's far too nice for that kind of stuff. But just because somebody's opening up or talking about themselves, or talking about a life wobble, don't need to go into doctor's mode, because that makes us go, fuck that.
Well, that's it.
It's probably the worst thing to do, isn't it? Oh, you need to do X.
I think, like you say, when you've had that, I don't know, my own experience was, I recognized that at sort of 12, 13, I was starting to struggle with anxiety, and actually it was OCD. And I think I tried to speak to someone, like I tried to sort of say a couple of things to a friend or whatever, and they were just sort of looked at me like, kind of,
you've gone out, mate.
And then
you're talking about
that just shut down. That shut down for the next 10, 15 years, right?
Well, it will, won't it? Because they made you feel daft, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot of shame.
For feeling that way.
So much shame, and so I suppose, you know, another message is, you know, if someone does be open to someone, you know, who's starting to communicate with you, and maybe, yeah, just be aware that if someone is asking for your help, then encourage
listen.
them.
Just listen.
Yeah,
just
well,
listen.
absolutely.
Just listen.
Totally. Just listen, right? You know,
just shut up. Up to the point.
Yeah. Don't do doctor. Don't do doctor. You know, that's just the worst, I think.
Exactly. But so do you, because obviously I'm just conscious of the time as well, because we're mostly male audience, like they just don't watch anything over 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I saw you was about to chip in a couple of times, unless I'm.
I was just going to say, you know, if there's any friends or anything talking about it, like, I know that especially when like alcohol and drugs, I guess, become that person's crutch, and then friends, you see it as someone being difficult, or you've been let down because they're drinking, etc. And just really just taking the time to take a step back and realize why that might be, because then as a result of that, what happened in Danny's situation, where he felt like he lost quite a few friends and felt very isolated as a result, and that was really sad to see, you know. And I know that a lot of people feel that regret now because they can't do anything about it, and it's, you know, there's just, I think the conversation is getting greater and people are understanding more. But I think it is quite difficult when you go from seeing somebody being, you know, like you said, high functioning, you know, it's not like Danny was depressed every day and people noticed that, to all of a sudden, well, why isn't he at my wedding, or why isn't he at my birthday? Because he's had a spiral and he's drinking. But that's not him purposely wanting to hurt you or purposely just being a nightmare. That's because there's something deeper going on, and taking the time to understand that, and then be, as hard as it is, still being a supportive friend, because, you know, what you don't want to do is isolate that person even more and then feel like they can't then turn to you, because it is just a vicious cycle then.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think somebody said in it, I think it was Andy Smith, we were talking about being in care. And he said actually he works with children quite a lot, and he said the one thing what he noticed, especially when you get a naughty kid, I've got one of them sometimes, but when you get like a naughty kid, the reason we get frustrated is not because of what they've done, it's because of how it made us feel. It's the same as like if I don't know, if somebody was drinking too much, or you found out they were taking drugs or whatever else. Actually, if somebody opens up, we've got to switch off our own emotions for a bit of how we feel and listen to them. You never know, in a few years' time, you might be able to take the right old piss and have a good laugh about it. But that at the moment, it's not about how we feel, it's about how that person feels. But,
that's very true.
But I think our work here was done, isn't it? Really?
For now.
Yeah. So let me hit that record button. Bear me 1 second.